Welcome to the Homeschool Together podcast. Where one working mom and a stay-at-home dad help you navigate the nuts and bolts of the growing and dynamic world of homeschooling.
With a focus on early learners, like me.
All the ins and outs of building and maintaining your homeschool life.
Homeschool.
Find out tips and tricks to make things like this easier.
I'm reading.
And ultimately, enjoy educating your kids. And what's that last thing?
Have fun together. Did I do good, Daddy?
Yeah, you did, sweetie. Good job. Hello and welcome back to Homeschool Together. I hope you guys are having a great time. If you have a chance, head down below. Check out our Gumroad page. There's a lot of cool things on there. And there might be something coming up in the horizon in a couple weeks, maybe a month or so. Ariel's been working diligently behind the scenes.
I have been.
Well, I've been slammed with all the things I got to do.
So slammed.
Yes, and then if you have a chance, head down and leave us a review on iTunes. That's really awesome. Kind of gives that social proof to other people that we are real people and we have ideas and it's a fun place to hang out, that type of thing.
Yeah, we're still going strong. What is this? 450
something.
450 something. So
we're in the future, you're in the past.
I know next year we're going to be rocking the 500th episode. I feel like this was originally our pandemic project. And I think that happened for a lot of people where they started a hobby or a business or whatever they started during the pandemic, and now it's still going on. It really changed our way of life, and this definitely has been this kind of solid that's been going on for all these years.
We're keeping the streak alive. Now the streak it's become habitual. We got to keep it going.
I know. I'm pretty excited about what the future holds. So, absolutely. And I'm super excited about this new project I'm working on. So when it's a little further along, we'll talk with you all about it.
Absolutely.
Until then,
let's talk about homeschooling with little kids. We'll talk a little bit about the older kids, but the idea of getting the hands on, not just the child annoys you and you kind of like throw them into the couch type of thing. We're talking about hands-on education.
Well, so I think I want to just stop for a sec because you're talking about the littler kids. I personally love hands-on things as an adult.
I've seen this a lot with some of the older kids I'm hanging around with and everything. And you're right, getting hands-on there's just something about being active in your learning as opposed to passive. And I spent so many years being a passive learner, lecture style, teacher at the top,
right?
Very, what they say, pedagogical, that type of thing.
Yeah, or just reading it from a book.
Or just, crushing equations on the board. I mean, it can be a very passive experience. Like you didn't have to go to class as long as you got the notes. Maybe you learned the same thing.
It's true.
But actually allowing the students to become active in their own education, you see such a brighter spark. And I know it's so hard for us because maybe we have a couple kids. Maybe we'll do an episode about toddlers here maybe in a couple weeks or so. But, when you're really busy, we're just like, okay, we got to do the lesson. Let's just get the lesson.
Yeah, let's check that box.
Let's get it done, check the box and everything. And we're rushing. And we talked about that with our juggling episodes a couple weeks ago. But here, really giving them the opportunity to be hands-on, taking control of their education, experiencing something, whatever that might be, going outside, digging up bugs as opposed to reading about bugs is way more impactful. It's something that they just connect with. It's something where the learning becomes memorable in a lot of respects, but you don't have to do a lot of lifting in that respect, but it becomes more memorable to them.
They totally remember, right? They retain more when they've had a more experiential, the more senses that you involve in the experience, the more that they seem to retain. So, really focusing and hands-on, of course, this is like every good thing in homeschooling. This takes more of our effort as parents. And so we wanted to go through a few of the subjects and give some ideas, but it's really, this is a great thing to do for your kids, even if they're not struggling. But if they are struggling with traditional or workbook style instruction, this is great. If they need to move, you've got what we call a wiggly learner. We have a wiggly learner. Our youngest is very wiggly. Or if you have somebody who's reluctant in whatever subject it is, or really needs that visual and tactile elements. So it is going to be a little bit more set up, right? Because we can't just open a workbook and say, okay, we're going to go forward with it. But it's great for those learners that definitely need that extra experience. And it's also great for all learners just to retain it a little bit better. I think we as humans retain better the more experience we get. You know, if I read something, I remember so much. If you and I talk about it, I remember more. If we watched it and then talked about it, I remember even more. If I was involved, I will almost never forget that experience. So I think it's true for everyone. You know,
And
it's important.
Yeah, it doesn't require a lot of prep. I mean, it does require a little bit of effort and everything.
There's some forethought there.
There's some forethought, but it doesn't require as much prep as we think, because I think that we get a little bit resistant when we think hands-on and thinks, oh, okay, we need to get more manipulatives. We need to do various things.
Well,
There's
and
expectations.
sometimes that might be the answer.
And absolutely true, yeah. But it doesn't require as much as we think to be more memorable and engaging, and that shouldn't be the resistance to that. But also another element too is if you're trying to go more hands-on, if you're trying to do more project-based learning like we talked about last week, there's going to be like a learning curve or an expectations curve. But once you get over that and you get up on that plateau, it becomes easier to do those things because the expectations has been set. Your learner has learned what it takes to do that thing. They've learned some skills, maybe how to present, how to research, how to gather information. And once they have those kind of intangible skills set from learning how to do the thing, all of a sudden they run a lot quicker. And these type of things where we think, oh, hands-on's more difficult, project-based learning's a little bit more difficult. Once we get up over that learning curve, it becomes a lot easier for us to go ahead and say, okay, we're going to do this activity.
Right.
It runs faster, it runs quicker because the learner knows what's going on.
I think it's definitely more in the planning preparation. Maybe it's not more necessarily. I mean, you're going to have to gather to make anything hands-on. You have to gather some amount of whatever those items are, right? You do have to, now maybe they are things that already exist in your home, or maybe there's something you have to get. You're going to have to bring in pieces, but it's really about the forethought of saying like, okay, how could I take this lesson and make it something that we can do instead of just passively?
Like an enhancement, right?
Yeah. Like how can we actively engage with this material in whatever way it is? You know, we talked about last week making the Nile and the pyramids out of Rice Krispie treats. Our daughter
History's never been so tasty.
I mean, our daughter was like 6 at the time. She's going to be 10 soon. And she actually talked about that last week. So it definitely made a big impression on her, right? Because this was an experience that she had, and she can still tell us information about like where they're located and stuff. So, you know, but there is going to be, I think it's a balance. There's a balance here between giving our kids something to experience and touch and interact with, and being like 100% Pinterest, because you can go all out. and if you've got that power, then that's awesome, rock star. But I don't think that we have to make this crazy wild craft or huge project. I mean, if you don't want to build a giant rocket ship out of cardboard or whatever, like I don't think we need to go all the way to that level to say it was hands-on. There's lots of things we can do between workbook pages or reading a book and, you know, doing something that could, you know, you could do a Pinterest post on. I think there's lots of flavors there. So I just don't get caught up in saying like, oh, experience. Okay, I got to go and like buy out half of Michael's. No. You know what I mean? Because you could get caught in that trap when you look for things online of things to do. You could definitely get caught in that. Well,
and I like the idea here where you're saying it's kind of an enhancement. You know, hands-on learning doesn't have to be a project-based learning. That's I think a big distinction there. Yeah. Now there may be some overlap where the hands-on learning is a project that you're doing. Absolutely, totally understand that. But the things I think we're trying to stress today are like enhancements. And I think if you've been following us on our YouTube channel about our space science journey that we've been doing, we have been leveraging the 3D printers, which are sitting to my right and your left, both of them, and they're nice and quiet right now because otherwise we wouldn't be recording. But we've been using these 3D printers to produce kit cards. You produced that awesome rocket, modular rocket set there.
Yeah, you did the little constellation, like eyepieces.
Yeah, shining a light through. Yeah. These are little things that added a little bit of value to the experience that we had. And these weren't things we sat down and, you know, we're working Fusion 360 for 5 hours to print these things. We went out onto MakerWorld or Thingiverse and we downloaded a model, sent it to the printer. 5 hours later, we had the thing. I could have done it the night before, let it print overnight, and all of a sudden I had this enhancement that I could use for tomorrow's lesson or activity or whatever we wanted to do. And it gave just a little bit more oomph to that lesson. Like the I thought the rocket ship is a good example where we're able to break down this massive rocket ship and all its constituent pieces and everything, and just put them in front of one of the kids, and they go ahead and build their own rocket while I do a lesson over here, and it's coinciding with our rocket week in our space science, right? Like that's something that we can do as a little bit hands-on, and they'll remember that. They'll imagine, what type of things we need to do to build a rocket. Well, where do the rockets go? What is the shape of the rocket? How do I organize them? Just having that little bit of extra a wrinkle to the lesson, I think is amazing, and that's something that we've been doing. That's not that you all have to run out and get 3D printers.
Well, no, it's funny,
but it's a good example of like adding a little bit of creativity to the lesson.
It is, and we have that ability in our house, which is awesome. But to put that in terms that like anyone could do, rather than 3D printing rocket parts, you could also just build rockets out of Legos.
Toilet paper containers.
Yep, you could do toilet paper containers.
Rolls, yeah.
You could do Legos you've got sitting around the house. They build their own spaceships. We have these cool cones that have the constellations, and they're punched out on the end of it so that you can shine a light through it and see it on the wall. We could have also taken index cards and a needle and punched through where the star locations were on a couple of the constellations, printed them out, and then you could have even done it on paper, printed it on paper, and then punched out those pinholes and shined a light through it and done the same exact thing. So you don't have to be fancy necessarily to do something that they'll remember. And our kids love that. They were running in and out of the bathroom to turn the lights off so that they could shine the light and see the different constellations. So, I mean, it can be simple things. But one of the first things is there is usually something to manipulate with your hands, right? So if you've got Legos, if you have Magnetiles in your house, or Dupelos, or
Lego, or Lincoln Logs, or something.
Wooden blocks,
yeah.
Even beans, buttons, coins. I mean, like anything little and tactile, there's a lot that you can do with that. So if we go into our first area, which is math, manipulatives is a huge part of.
Yeah, especially those
huge part of math.
Early learners, I think it's really key, and even well into we're well over halfway through 5th grade Math Mammoth right now with our oldest, and you can still be doing division work, working through multiplication tables, working through place value, especially when we're getting into decimal places and stuff like that. Blocks and geometry and fraction blocks, whatever you want to use, is still a very, very important thing. Making charts and doing graphing. She was doing graphing for almost, like 2 or 3 weeks. It was a huge graphing chapter that we were doing. And she could be writing her own graphs and
we could be
plotting
doing
her own
graphs
charts,
of things,
doing lines and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I could see, for example, we didn't do this, but I could see our oldest getting way into, if we told her to chart all of her clothes, because she always wants us to buy new clothes for her because she's kind of fashionista. If I had said well, chart all your long sleeve shirts and short sleeve shirts and all the different pants and the jeans, and she would have had a ball putting together a bar graph of all of the different types of clothing things that she has. For example, that could have been one that we could have done. One of the things I like about math is that, when you get a little bit too high, it's more difficult, but especially in lower levels, everything can be made into a game.
100%.
Whether you buy a game that has that in there, a lot of the games that you probably already have in your house might have elements that you need for math. I mean, nearly all games involve some amount of math, but if there's a specific topic that you're studying, you can probably find it in one of your games. And if not, you can make a game. If you look online, there's tons of ideas to make games out of math, or you can take it into the real world. That's another great way to make things hands-on. We were talking last episode about our daughter doing travel planning when we were studying around the world, and she was planning out how much the budgeting would cost for how much it would cost for our family of 4 to go to one of these places and all the different places we wanted to visit. But you could take your child grocery shopping or, whatever it is. We could do any kind of budgeting. It was funny. We were talking about, earlier tonight, it's funny, I didn't tell you, but we were talking about the most expensive Cricut can actually cut fabric. was like $450 or $500. It's like super expensive, but it can actually cut like fabric for you to sew. And our older daughter was like, okay, Mom, we've got to save up. Listen, if I put in this much per week, and then she started doing all the math of like how we could save to buy this thing so that she could have it like rotary cut her like purse patterns and stuff, right? And she was like, and she started doing all of the math about what that would be. And I was like, this is the perfect example of like how you can bring math and make it something real.
Sure. Absolutely. Now, kind of going back into more real life applications, obviously the grocery store is a huge element there. Huge amounts of addition, lists. How many times do we need something? How much does that cost? We have multiplication built into that if you need to get 2 or 3 boxes of pasta versus 1, that type of thing. It's right there. Also, cooking. We're big foodies. We love to bring our girls into the kitchen. Doubling and tripling or having recipes is a great way to, bring in a ton of math. Super easy way to do that. And to do it passively where it's not like, I think one of the things when we are bringing education into the real world in our everyday activities that we try not to make it feel like a school or learning and homeschool, and make it feel more like, well, this is just what we do. These are expectations. Like, this is how we cook, and here's how we do it.
Or obviously, could you help me with this?
Yeah, like, we're being intentional about doing the cooking because we know it's educational. But I think I think a lot of times I see with my daughters is like, oh, it's school dad right now, as opposed to just dad and everything. Yeah. And I really, when I do those other things like the cooking or going grocery shopping, I don't approach it as school dad. I do it as dad. Right. I'm like, hey, can you guys go down that aisle and get me 2 of these things? But I don't want to spend more than $10. So get me the whatever version, and bring me back and tell me what the price was. Right. And because I got to go do this thing over here. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, no problem, Dad.
And they actually get really into it in the grocery store. They're really very excited about it.
Like I'm right to the point now where I'm going to go into the store. I'm going to sit down at the the Subway, get a sandwich, and I'm going to have them go do like a very small shop where they have to pay with cash and whatnot. And I'm just going to be right there. And when I see them come to the checkout line, I'll walk up and observe them right there.
Let the employee know that they're not lost children.
They're not lost children and everything. But like, I want to give them that opportunity to go do that. I think my oldest would just flip if I'm like, hey, go buy a gallon of milk, go get me a bottle of soda, and then go get some, peanut butter.
Because she can reach all the high shelves.
She can reach all the high shelves. She can do it all. And like, here's the shopping cart. Take your sister with you. You're in charge. And tell little sister, hey, big sister's in charge. You help her get the things. And really just give them that power.
I mean, we send them to aisles now when we're shopping. I'll be like, okay, go get the Scooby snacks. Okay, you go get those. And they'll go off and...
Scooby snacks.
They will find those Scooby snacks.
They're so good.
So Scooby snacks are amazing.
They're so good.
So yeah, I think math is a bit easier, right? Because until you get to really complex topics, and then if you do get to more complex topics, that might be an area where you could bring in like... a video of some that shows how that complex math was used in the real world. Something like that could be really cool.
Especially if that's tied into something that your learner is either interested in or hopes to become. Like if they want to be a firefighter, okay, we'll talk about rates of change with respect to water going through the pipe and diameter of the piping or whatever like that. Like if you're talking to like a middle schooler or a young high schooler, you can talk about those levels of things with them. So you're absolutely right. Yeah, I like that idea where we're kind of like blending it into the interests.
Yeah, I mean, if there's not something we can absolutely do that we can physically touch, at least we could find a video or something that shows why this is important to learn. Like we always ask that in school, right? When we were in, especially in math, like why do we need to learn this? Yeah. And there was up to a certain point, teachers could readily answer why you needed to know like addition and stuff. But at some point when you were doing all these integrals and stuff, it became more difficult for them to give us real world applications rather than just say, well, you need this for your degree. So keep going,
It's useful in a wonky software system that you'll buy later.
Right.
But now moving from math into reading, I think is a little bit more challenging. Not as challenging at the early years because I think we're using a lot of manipulatives, letter tiles, things of that nature. when you get a little bit older and you're starting to talk about reading books, it's like, okay, well, how do we do hands-on? And you got to become a little bit more creative.
Well,
I
I think that's when, so our daughter and her best friend have started the
book
BFF book club.
Yep.
We've talked about it a little bit on the show before. She is so motivated to read now because she's got this book club to prepare for. So maybe
a little bit of pressure, and that's nice.
Maybe
Good
so.
pressure. I think good pressure is a good thing, like where there's a little bit of push and drive to get to the thing, and there's a little bit of a pull for them to finish it. There's expectations and that type of thing.
Yeah, I agree. It's been really good for her. So, I mean, that's definitely an experience that's going along with the reading. But there's also, depending on the book you choose and how, like, maybe you're reading Charlotte's Web. I'm going to throw that out there. You could tie that in definitely with like, hey, when you get so far along in the book, we're going to go visit a farm and then we're going to have this experience, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe you do it in the summertime so that you can then go to your county fair or state fair, right? Like they take the Wilbur to and Charlotte to. So, there's options that you could do of make a field trip to go with that. Maybe there's an art project or something that they're building. Maybe they're building an overall art piece or something that's going to showcase how they felt about the book or the main things that they loved. I'm reading the Lunar Chronicles right now with our daughter, and she is so into it. If I asked her to be putting together pieces that represented all her favorite characters and the things she's learning in the book, she'd have a ball with that. She would absolutely do that, and it would reinforce the story and the memory of the story. So we have this amazing advantage as homeschoolers because we get to pick any book we want.
Yeah, right.
We don't have to get our kids interested in that boring book that like the school board chose for fourth graders, and all fourth graders read this same boring book, whatever it is. Like, we get to choose anything. So if our kids are super into Greek mythology, great, then we're reading this book. If they're super into superheroes, awesome, we're reading this other book, and whatever it is. I think we have a great advantage. We can find something that they love and then find some way to make a connection in the real world.
Yeah, and for those early learners, we're thinking about the manipulatives for reading. We're talking about sidewalk chalk. We're doing window markers and
actually
details.
Learn your phonics and things.
Yeah, words files and magnets and using letter magnets and things of that nature. Going to like dictation and drawing, where you are telling the story, and maybe if you have a more art-focused learner, they could be drawing pictures. I mean, you could imagine if our oldest had a little bit more art skills, maybe she would be wanting to draw and create characters that are in the crest. Or was it the crest?
Yeah, that's the book we're reading of the Lunar Chronicles.
The crest book and whatnot. Oh, this is what the queen looks like, and this is what this person looks like. Or pulling down images from like a Wikipedia fandom page for that book series and seeing some of the fan art that's been done and seeing if she can create something her own. With some of our younger kids who may be more story-based, want to talk, be they're more verbal in their learning, using story cubes. We have the Rory story cubes.
Oh, those are so fun.
Really nice. Also using picture prompts. So like, here's a picture of this thing that you can print off from online. Using your Charlotte's Web example, here's Charlotte, and here's Wilbur, and tell me what's happening, and kind of regurgitate what the story was telling you, or retell this story in some other way. Using those kind of cues for that type of learner is another way you can go, where it's more hands-on. It's not so much passive sitting there. They're able to tell you something back.
Yeah. We just got Mad Libs for our oldest, and she's having a ball with Mad Libs. Yep. We're having a really good time. Writing and reading are two that also lend themselves really well to games. There's tons of games that involve reading. Our girls are just starting to get into Lorcana. Yep. And so as a
ton of reading there, but not too much.
It's not too much, but it's really good. It's our girls are having to kind of, our older daughter's fine, but our younger one is still, she's still in, she just started AR2, right? Yep. Yeah, so she's early in.
We're about a quarter of the way through.
Yeah, so she can read some, but there's still a lot of words that are outside. But she's got a pretty good memory, and the more she plays Lorcana, she's like, "Oh, I recognize that. Okay,
Yeah, I know
that's
what
the
that
word.
that one does.
Yeah, that's what this word is. So whatever game it is, but there's lots of great word games. There's, Bananagrams is one of my favorite ones. And they have Bananagrams Junior that you can do all kinds of cool stuff with. And then the regular Bananagrams. It's just, I think that beats Scrabble every day of the week in my book. But there's tons of great games that you can get. And if you don't have a game that works that you've already purchased, there's lots of free stuff online to look and find games that can encourage that. There's also games that can encourage writing. So those are common game elements, just like math concepts that are often included in games.
Moving beyond ELA and math, getting into some of the smaller, but I think just as important subjects. History is a good one. I really like the idea of doing role playing. If you're learning about
acting is the best,
some type of historical figure or event or whatever, and you can assign roles to certain learners if you have more of a performative arts, drama oriented child retelling in a dramatic way the story of Lewis and Clark or whatever it might be. That can really give a really good way to bring the learning into the child and be more hands-on and more active and more physical with respect to the learning.
Well, it's a great way to understand history too, because history is...
And to draw out that recall.
Yeah,
right?
and history, one of the other ways that I've always loved to do history is like a debate or discussion with it, right? Especially debate's good because history is rarely black and white. There's usually nuance to it, or the way that history was told for so many years wasn't actually what happened. And so we're uncovering that. So you can almost be like a history detective, looking at it from different angles,
looking
for example.
The nuance and everything.
Looking for the nuance. We've done... I remember in school doing like newspaper articles for history and writing like, how would I spin this? If I were writing for a newspaper at that time and I was on this side of that issue or whatever, what would I have said? And you're right. I think putting yourself in the position and dressing up if you're going to do role playing, that's also really fun.
Absolutely.
Great way to bring it home.
If you have an artistic student, you can obviously lean into this as well. Like, for example, if you're doing a little bit of ancient history or ancient early history, ancient civilizations type of thing, obviously sitting under the table and doing some painting up on the underneath the table with some paper that's taped to it and doing some cave art.
Oh yeah, that's a cool idea.
Very memorable.
That sounds messy.
Really, a little messy. I don't know if I'd advise that one. You might want to pull out what was the smock that we used to have?
Oh yeah, this big smock.
Smock, but what's the tuffo? The tuffo, put the tuffo on the kid and you can hose them off after you're done there.
Maybe do it outside. You could do dirt painting or things. Yep. There's so many great hands-on projects to do for ancients. You took popsicle sticks and made like a trebuchet,
I think it was.
Yeah, but you also made a Roman cart, I remember.
Yeah.
Or I don't know, we didn't have to be Roman necessarily, but an ancient cart with that and little string. As we've talked about, Rice Krispie treats, you can cook and make make artwork out of that. That's a really fun one to do. There's lots of really cool things. I think one of the best things is the history timeline, right?
Yeah.
The one that wraps around your house and your kids fill that out. We're going to be embarking on that soon.
That's where the hands-on may merge a little bit more with the project-based learning.
Yeah, it's true.
If you're trying to blend those together. And then moving on from history, kind of going to the science. I think science is very similar to math in a lot of respects. It's very hands-on. It lends itself to that experimentation and learning through experimentation. A lot of activities around science are very almost 100%, hands-on. I mean, obviously you can do some workbooks and things like that, but even the workbooks all of a sudden start asking you to do experiments.
They do.
In the real world, they're like, hey, grab some popsicle sticks and some Q-tips and we're going to do this thing. You're absolutely right. All of a sudden, even the ones that are workbook focused, all of a sudden you're doing hands-on. I think science is probably the most hands-on of all the subjects that lends to it the most, because I think math, you start to get into a little bit more of the rote practice where you're doing the problems. But science is almost always it's so easy to become a hands-on activity. And if you're thinking about adding hands-on, even if your student is like, they really like it, it's almost like a reward where you do it last because it really gets them excited about it. Science is probably the easiest way to go for the hands-on.
So it's funny because you being a science guy are like, oh yeah, science. And I'm like, oh man, science experiments. Like that causes me a lot of stress. I think one of the good things is there's tons of books and there's tons of YouTube videos and blogs and things about people doing experiments. So, there's lots of videos and things to watch. Don't feel too intimidated. And I think most of the time, especially when we're dealing with elementary, usually we can do these experiments with things we have around the house.
Yeah.
There's usually some way to not have to buy specialized equipment. It's not like we're getting into upper levels of chemistry and things.
Yeah, they're not calling for like hydrochloric acid. And
No, they're not. I mean, this is where there is more prep, right? In being
someone at Evan Moore's like, I'll take that bet. Yep, I'll put it in the next book.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think it's like. This one's more for me like, okay, we'd have to prepare the ingredients, then we have to explain what we're going to do, then we do the experiment. And sometimes, not that hands-on isn't great, because we're talking about why hands-on is so great, but sometimes I think one of the problems with science is that you can end up moving from like experiment to experiment to experiment without the kids really like, it's almost like a magic trick, like, ooh, that was cool, without knowing why. And so that one's a little bit challenging for me to like balance.
It was kind of funny. I think I had this exact issue with our oldest. She came back from class the other day. One of her she takes a science class, and they were talking about forces and like, what are forces? What are the characteristics of forces? And I had to explain to her. So for example, force is a vector, right? And that means it has magnitude and direction. And she's like, I don't understand what that means, Daddy. I said, okay, there you are right there. You're sitting in the chair. I said, if I come up over here and I'm pointed away from her and I go, I want to apply a force to you, and I go ahead and push my arms out. I said, but you're over there and I'm pushing over here, right? I'm applying a force in this direction, but it doesn't interact with anything. Why? What was the problem? She goes, well, because it wasn't at me. I said, exactly. So now I'm going to apply a force to you, at you, and all of a sudden you'll fall out of the chair. And I'm not going to do that, but you understand that I can apply the force over here. That doesn't it matters which direction I apply that force. And she was like, oh, I understand now about that. And then we were talking about forces, and I was giving some examples. And you're right. Like, we were reading, she was having to read through this like kind of page and then answer a couple questions. And she really didn't understand, what do these words mean and everything. And I had to explain them to her. And you couldn't necessarily get that through hands-on. Now, you could infer it through experience.
Well, I mean, how you demonstrated to her was a hands-on example.
It kind of was. It was a real world example, but she was passively watching me explain it, right?
I just think that I guess the problem is, and they used a bunch of cars and stuff, and they did force example experimentation in their class. And I remember when she talked about that too, but she didn't really understand why. So I think science, we have to be a little bit careful that we put enough of the why in with the hands-on, because it's really easy to buy like science experiment kits or even books that do easy experiments without that grounding of why. It can be challenging. Science for me is the toughest one. I know that you're like, yay, science. And that one stresses me a little bit, because it's explaining it well enough and then gathering all the supplies to do the experiments. So luckily, a lot of early science has to do with observation of nature and things like you're talking about, like forces, easy things that we can just demonstrate or they can observe or interact with.
Yeah, I think a good example of this is like if you're teaching 3D printing to somebody, you could easily go online and download, like we talked about earlier, downloading a model from Maker World or whatever. And you could throw it to the printer, hit the print button, walk away. 5 hours later, you have it. Do you know a lot about 3D printing at that point? You know how to hit a button. You know how to wait. Right. You know how to change filament. Okay, that's fine. But the active design is a more subtle and more challenging task that you have to learn. Okay, am I going to use a software tool? How do I design something? How do I measure something? Is that thing the correct thing? How do I reference things? That is more of a process there, and the printing almost becomes secondary in that respect. Science is very similar to that, where you could go off and do a bunch of experiments, and that's great. And the kids may remember those experiments. They may remember when I put the vinegar into the balloon with the baking soda, all of a sudden the balloon fills up and, with some type of gas. And that's great. It does require some fundamental understanding of what is occurring there. You could do 1 million experiments and they're not going to learn very much of the underlying concept that is causing that to do, but it's just a fun experiment. And I think there's a balance between the two, between doing experiments and teaching the concepts. And I think science requires both of those. And it's hard just to do all the experiments and not do any concepts, where they're understanding the words and the meaning of what is happening that is explained to them. Now, that could happen through experiment, where you do the experiment, then you start asking questions and we start to understand what happened. Or you can preload the understanding and then have it validated through the experiment. Whatever path you want to choose, I've seen both. And I've actually seen both paths, both at the college level, where they did experiment first physics classes, where you were literally just doing experiments. And then from those experiments, you essentially derived your understanding of the concepts. I went through that class having to take it a second time because in high school, my second physics AP class, I didn't score high enough. So I was forced to take the class again. And I remember just sitting through the class going, I understand the concepts that are going here. This is just a waste of time, because you could sit there up on a board in an hour and teach them the next 3 weeks of their experiments. And I saw more value in that because we could move faster and we can cover more ground. And yeah, the class didn't cover as much because we were doing a lot of experiments, but it was very interactive. It was collaborative. You're working with other people. You were learning soft skills, things of that nature. And I started to see the value in those type of thinking, but I think that you need both of them. So I think science, you're right. Science needs that kind of balance.
This is a tricky one,
it
right?
Is,
where the other ones I think are more straightforward to learn whatever that piece is and then have an experience to reinforce it or deepen that understanding. And yeah, this one's just a little bit more because there's so many books out there. It's like, oh yeah, 25 science experiments for kids, or here's a science experiment kit, but they just don't really know why that stuff's happening. And there's a little bit of explanation, but without the foundation to build, it's a tough one.
I think going from here is this, getting on to the next topic is something that we have been approaching a lot in a lot of our videos. If you watch our vlogs on YouTube, the idea of teaching similar subjects to multiple age groups. I think that is a big challenge. I know there's a lot of families out there that have to do that. Tough. If you're lucky enough to have that, that 6-year-old and a 7-year-old, and you can kind of bundle them together, that's awesome. But a lot of us have a little bit more of a gap there. We have 3.5 years between our kids. And
some folks have three or four or more children.
Or you may be doing the situation of having like a 6-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 12-year-old. And how do you balance all three of those children?
Sure.
Obviously, adapting for multiple ages, I think, is a very big challenge, especially if you're doing hands-on. Picking that base activity, I think, is the grounding point, and then leveling up the activity based on their capabilities, or assigning roles and tasks to different children.
Kind of like a project team, right? Everyone would have their skill that they could offer, and older students who have different skill sets or elevated skill sets can do different pieces of whatever that project is. And I think there could be a lot of value in that, right? Because they're working together, so they're learning from their older siblings, but you're not trying to level up the entire activity or whatever this thing is that they're doing to all be at the highest level. And you're not, lowering it all to be at the lowest level. You're giving everybody something according to kind of where they're at, meeting their level. And I think that's really appropriate. And
I would say don't overthink the leveling up, because I think from my standpoint, leveling something up is a lot easier than kind of gearing it down. At least that's been our experience so far. We haven't really gone in the other direction where we had something that was more advanced. We're about to do that with our prehistory, which is a 3rd grade curriculum, I think, through Blossom and Root, right? And we're going to kind of gear that down.
Well, we've already done that.
We have, though, yeah.
We did. We just didn't have 2, right? So the first time we did it, our daughter was 1st grade.
7-ish or something.
I think she was
7 or 8,
1st or 2nd grade, so maybe 2nd grade, something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we've done that before, where we've had to level down. It is harder to level down, right? Everything, like I kind of always think to myself, everything can be a PhD, right? Yeah. So it's always, there's no problem making things harder. We can always make it more.
It's easier to add layers of clothes than it is to take off, because eventually you run out of clothes to take off. It gets too hot.
Yeah. And so I think there's a base level of understanding for whatever topic it is. And it's like at some point you just can't go any lower because they can't understand any meaningful depth of that topic. But you can always go all the way up to PhD. So you can always make it harder. But I love the idea of roles. I think that, giving, maybe one child is your presenter, one child is going to write everything. The others, maybe a younger child is in charge of doing a bunch of the art. I mean, whatever it is. And acting things out is also a great way to work with multiple levels.
If we had to give a diorama project to our children, more of a hands-on, you're right. Our oldest will be kind of the writer and doing some research and drawing the pictures of the prehistoric animals or bugs or whatever would be given to our youngest, and she would be happy to do that, and we would combine their skills. And I would say, don't overthink the leveling up, because a lot of times each activity can just be added with some writing activity. It can be added to some additional more complex reading, watching a video, whatever it might be.
Some more research before they participate.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be this overarching theme that you're definitely layering between, lessons and all that stuff. Don't overthink it. It can just be something simple. Like, for example, we're doing the space science, and tomorrow, we're studying Uranus, and there's lots of jokes in the house about this.
The kids think it's hilarious.
Oh, because our youngest loves the Captain Underpants.
Yeah.
And it was
the first joke.
It was a revelation to her when Harold and what's the other guy's name? Harold.
I don't remember.
Jack and Harold? No.
Harold and... I don't remember what the name
so
is.
Harold and the other kid, they meet in kindergarten, and they start chuckling because the teacher talked about Uranus, and they both loved it. And for like a year, she didn't understand the joke, and I finally explained it to her, and she loves the joke now. Anyway, so my oldest has to read a book about Uranus and about the rings, and I found a couple pages about the rings, and all I'm doing, leveling up this tomorrow, is she has to read those 4 pages about the rings, and I need her to write a nice paragraph that has a beginning, tells me some facts, and gives me some closing about that 4-sentence paragraph of what you learned about in those 4 pages. Super easy to just add in the ELA work, add in the writing work, add in the pulling down information work, organizing her thoughts. It was so easy. Took me a few seconds to put together, put a page into the book with the instructions for her, and she'll go ahead and do it. It's so easy for me to just level that up for her, and I didn't have to overthink it. Maybe a minute or so worth of work. It was not a big deal.
Yeah, it's really one of the things to think on too is, can you have some materials that are around your house that are good kind of go-to things? I mean, maybe one thing that your kids really like to do is make lap books. I mean, our kids haven't really done a lot of that, but I could see them really enjoying that. That you buy a whole box of file folders, and they make these really cool, like, mini books with the things that they took away from their learning. Maybe you have stuff like that. It's your art supplies, your glue sticks, and your index cards, and popsicle sticks, and your other pieces. You just have some kind of things around, and look about your house for what toys you have, and how you can use those as well, and if those can be incorporated in some way. I think the more stuff that we can kind of have at our disposal, the easier it is to level up. And your own children best if they are the kind of kids who are going to want to make all their experiences outside. We know some folks who are just like, they're outside like 5 or 6 hours a day. That is their jam. So their tools and ready manipulatives are going to be different, right? They're going to be things that they use outdoors, and they have that stuff ready. If your family is like all about arts or all about crafts, then you might have that kind of bin of things ready, because that's the stuff that you're going to lean into. So your learner's best, but there's always a way. I think in just about every subject, there's some way to make an experience or pull it in and make it hands-on.
Yeah. It's just kind of a passing closing thought here. When you are thinking about moving hands-on, we want you to think about keeping it simple. I think that's a great motto to have when you're homeschooling and doing homeschooling. Try to keep it simple.
It always starts that way.
It always starts that way.
It doesn't always end that way, but it always starts that way.
It can always go pear-shaped, but keeping it simple, going slowly, adding in the element of hands-on as sort of like an evolving element where you kind of find your way. You understand your child the most. You understand what things they like to do. You understand what type of ways they like to learn. apply that into your, your hands-on activities. Keep it simple, but also keep it cheap. Don't go out and grow the $85 tomato or whatever it is, or the $72 chicken pad thai that we've done before. We don't need to go out and buy really expensive materials. Try to keep it simple. Hit the dollar store, whatever you want to do. To get those
Goodwill has like great craft supplies too.
Like if you ever
tons of stuff.
Thrift your way to manipulatives is a great way to go. I'm no shame. We have done that for years. Going in there anytime I need something, man, one of the first places I stop is at a Goodwill. They always have some really great things in there. And they're in baggies, and there's always like multiple things in there. And you're like, well, I could definitely use that too.
Yeah, stamps and all kinds of cool craft supplies.
Yeah, they have a lot of great stuff there. So definitely check out thrifting. Keep it cheap, keep it simple. And I think that will help you easily be able to add in a lot of hands-on activities, especially if you're considering more project-based learning. From the previous episode that we talked about, thinking about hands-on as well, I think is another wrinkle that you can do to add a little bit more vibrancy, a little bit more excitement to your homeschool, and maybe get your learners a little bit more excited about things they're learning about.
Thanks so much for joining us today and making us a part of your homeschool journey. Please engage with us on social media. Join our Homeschool Together podcast group on Facebook and find us at Homeschool Together Podcast on Instagram. We'd love to hear your feedback, questions, and recommendations. Until next time,
Happy homeschooling!